Guys, it happened. It is here. It is out now for us to consume. If you've been a regular listener of the show or a watcher of the show over the last 18 months, you'll know that I've been talking with the clubhouse leader in terms of appearances on the Tusk Pod, the legend, the ABS, the Aussie boxing scribe himself, Anthony Cox. We've hinted and we've teased at an unbelievable project that he has literally spent 7 years working on. It is here, right there, guys. The Brawl at the Sydney Opera House and other Aussie boxing yarns, all about diving into the rich history of Australian boxing through the 70s and 80s. Guys, I've got mine. I can't wait to read it. It's just been released today. So when you see this, I will have already read it. We'll be talking about it on the pod. We'll get Tony back on the pod to talk about it. Don't worry about that. But it is available globally on Amazon.com for you to all enjoy. The link to the book will be in the description of this episode, so click away. And if you do, not only will you be reading and consuming a fantastic boxing-related piece of literature, but you'll also be supporting one of the best guys in the sport globally. So available now, guys, The Brawl at the Sydney Opera House and other Aussie boxing yarns.
Let's go and move with life. Let it go, something new tonight. Let's go and move with life. Let it go, something new tonight.
All right, well, here I am joined all the way from, as I just found out, East London in the UK with long-time boxing writer Declan Warrington. Declan, thanks for coming on the show, mate. I'm pumped to have a chat. There's not a shortage of anything to talk about, mate, so I'm keen to jump into it with you.
Zach, pleasure. Thank you.
Beautiful, mate. Well, let's start. We'll turn back the clock a little bit to the start of the month, which was an unbelievable weekend to kick off May. And we'll start over in Japan with Naoya Inoue defending his Undisputed Super Bantamweight title against Junto Nakatani. Awesome undercard too, but as we always do, we'll start at the top. Declan, did this fight live up to the expectations you had in your mind, and what were your expectations before the first bell rang?
It did, yeah. So I gave Nakatani more chance of beating Inoue than I've ever given anyone of beating Inoue, and I say that as someone who once thought Stephen Fulton had a really good chance of beating him. That isn't to say that I made him the favourite, but what I expected was a really high quality fight, not necessarily thriller minute stroke drama, and it was a really high quality fight. The word organic gets thrown around far too often for my liking. I find it quite cheesy quite often, but there was something very organic about the fight as well, because it was all Japanese. It had the crowd it ought to have had for it. It had the occasion it ought to have had for it. Nothing felt too contrived, and I say that in an era where things are getting very contrived. We've had Joshua fighting Jake Paul relatively recently, and it wouldn't be a surprise by any stretch if you get other fights along those lines. This was boxing at its best, really. I don't think boxing needs to have knockdown after knockdown and blood and guts when it's as good quality as that. Yeah, brilliant fight. And to be honest, I don't expect it to happen, but I still think Nakatani is the biggest threat to Inoue, and I still think Inoue's hardest next fight would be a rematch of Nakatani.
Did you hear Rudy Hernandez's recent comments?
I did, yeah, I did.
Wow, that isn't a vote of confidence and a one hell of a prediction. I don't know what is. For anyone that didn't hear it, Rudy Hernandez said if they don't beat Inoue in the rematch, he will never train anyone ever again, which is a wild thought, but that's certainly some confidence from the losing camp.
It is. It's also the sort of comment we hear made regularly in boxing from fighters. If I lose, I won't fight again. From promoters, it's an unusual one from a trainer, but there are trainers who stray into the territory of wanting to be a promoter at times as well. But I know what he was aiming for, and I'd very happily see it. I would. I can't help but think, and this was something that was suggested to me before the fight by Chris Algieri, that there might be an element of imposter syndrome from Nakatani, who's grown up, who's been climbing the ranks, while Inoue has been at the top of the tree this whole time, and that finally, once he was in the ring, he might be like, wow, this is Inoue, and that kind of takes some getting your head around. And I think there was an element of that, and I think that, as much as anything, would be what Hernandez might take confidence from if we're on it from the opening bell now, if we're not intimidated. And Nakatani, don't forget, is a very intelligent fighter and would have been able to absorb lessons from sharing the ring with Inoue. But one of the most interesting things going into the fight, one of the talking points, I should say, is Inoue in decline. At the risk of sounding wise after the event, I never believed he was, because what I thought we were seeing with the occasional knockdowns, etc., was a combination of him fighting well above his natural weight division, which is, again, a reminder of what a talented fighter he is, but also the risk he takes. There are times, he has the boxing ability, particularly with his feet and that jab, to win fights without taking the risk he does, but even when he's in convincing winning positions, he takes risks because he wants to back himself to stop you, to hurt you. When he gets hurt, he retaliates, and it's not like an emotional, well, it's a slightly emotional, but it's not an out-and-out emotional retaliation, a loss of composure. It's I'm going to hurt you now. I'm going to make you pay for that. And so he will get knocked down. But I'll happily see it again. I don't think we will.
Yeah. So what do you think will be next for both guys?
Inoue increasingly sounds like, well, that's the other thing to appreciate to a degree about both of them, but Inoue in particular. And at this point, I'm probably starting to sound like I'm his biggest fan. I'm far from it. I do really admire him, but probably my favourite thing about him is he is the most busy by some distance of the world's elite fighters. And it wouldn't be a huge surprise if he ended up somehow fighting twice before the end of the year. But what is happening is he is, I say running out of, but he's almost running out of these elite opponents. The big one that people are talking about now is Ben Rodriguez. If the fight were made today, I would make him a favourite against Rodriguez. I don't think we'll see that fight this year. I think Rodriguez has some things to take care of between now and then anyway. So presumably they're going to build towards that with Inoue in against some lower key opponents, but almost harsh to use the words lower key because he can't be fighting a Nakatani, a Fulton, a Rodriguez every single time, because as much as this is probably a golden era for those weight divisions, those opponents don't exist all the time. And also, it'd be bad management for him. You would, particularly the way he fights, he's never been the sort of opponent who looks like he's going to have the lengthiest of careers. He's defying those expectations right now anyway, but if you keep putting him in the toughest fights as opposed to occasionally having building fights, occasionally having keep busy fights, you will wear him out a lot more quickly than you ought to.
Yeah, it seems like especially with Inoue, 33 years old now, once that he's got the perfect blend of athletic ability and mental capacity, his mind is just as fast as his body is, but once that those reactions slow down just that little bit and the mind's still willing, but the body's not there, 33 at 122 pounds, started at 108, it's like, how long can this train keep rolling? But I'm like you, not to say that I thought there were massive signs of decline or anything like that. There had certainly been more signs of recklessness with Inoue up at 122, which again makes him so fun to watch, but it's going to be interesting to see. But much more interesting for me moving forward, and you mentioned the Ben Rodriguez fight that seemingly Robert Garcia or Eddie Hearn came out and said they wanted to set up for Inoue towards the end of the year, possibly early next year. More interesting for me is, what do you do with Nakatani next if there isn't a rematch? What would you like to see from Junto?
I think you treat his career like Inoue no longer exists, like Inoue's retired. And I would love to see the rematch. And who knows, and I'm speculating now because, again, I don't think it will happen. But if he won, then you've got a trilogy and that'd be incredible. But I think you treat his career like Inoue's retired and you just try to again, use a bit of a cliche term, but the best Nakatani that Nakatani can be, achieve everything he tries to be. This was always the money fight. This was always the obvious thing for him to pursue. Likewise, Inoue eventually, but he has a lot of ability. He's a really good fighter. Has only actually lost to an all-time great, and was improving up to arguably may improve off the back of this fight. So there's plenty left in Nakatani's career. Plenty of titles to fight for. Plenty of opponents, and I fully expect us, if we're sitting here talking in 2 years' time, to probably be talking about Nakatani and appreciate him in similar way to the way we are now.
Yeah, and great point. Just as you mentioned, the momentum sort of started to be turning his way late in the fight in the 10th round. And as often happens with great fighters like Inoue, an undesirable outcome happens, and the great fighter, the favourite, ends up being on the right side of sort of that unfortunate circumstance, which certainly isn't the first time we've seen that in boxing. And unfortunately for Junto, but certainly the future is bright, that's for sure. And I thought worth mentioning as well, Declan, Kazuto Ioka really tried for greatness against Takuma Inoue on the undercard of the WBC World Bantamweight title, and it looks like it's going to be a very hard uphill battle for Kazuto up at 118 pounds, but certainly one of my favourite fighters over the last few years. And if it is the end, certainly a notable and very fun career, and Kazuto Ioka goes down as a legend too. But no, great card from Japan, mate, but they did happen a few weeks ago, so we're sort of getting to this probably last out of everyone that exists on the internet, but that's cool. It's definitely worth talking about.
It still feels relevant, doesn't it? It still made such an impression, and in comparison to anything since then, Benevidez, Ramirez aside, it's still kind of top of the landscape right now, and deserves to be. We should. Boxing doesn't get things right to the extent it got things right that weekend nearly enough, and I kind of think if we can't enjoy that, then we may as well give up, because most of the time it's getting things wildly wrong.
Absolutely, mate. Well, you've taken all the segues for me, Declan. You're doing all the heavy lifting for me, mate. We'll move on to David Benevidez's cruiserweight debut against Zurdo Ramirez, who just an absolute thrashing, and becomes, at his first fight at the weight class, a unified champion with 2 of the alphabet titles. Mate, did you see this fight being as one-sided as it ultimately ended up being?
No, I did make Benevidez the favourite. Up before this fight, I wasn't entirely sold on Benevidez to the extent that everyone else was, which isn't to say I thought he was anything other than a world-class fighter. It's just, and I know this goes to the territory a little bit of him having a nickname he does, but when he's been spoken about as a monster, I was like, okay, but this is up at cruiserweight now. And for example, when he fought Anthony Yard, which was a really good performance, and I probably say this as someone with probably too much of a soft spot for Anthony Yard. I think Anthony Yard's a really good fighter. I thought I gave Yard less chance against Kovalev and Beterbiev than I did against Benevidez, and Benevidez beat him more convincingly. But I also reflected on that and thought, and it is something that occurred to me before that fight happened. He may well be shot form off the back of sharing the ring with Beterbiev like he did. This fight, and if you wanted to be difficult, you could say, and it would be unfair, and this is not where I'm coming from, but I do think it's relevant, Benevidez looked incredibly destructive at cruiserweight. But this was also against another former super middleweight. That's very different to fighting Joao Pitara. But to go back to your first question, I made Benevidez a favourite, but I made him, say, a 60-40 favourite. What really surprised me, but simultaneously is very telling. No one I spoke to, no one backed Ramirez, which, again, Ramirez is a really good fighter leading into that, improving as well. Had a really good win against Chris Billam-Smith, who is a fully fledged cruiserweight. And yet no one gave him a chance, which, again, puzzled me. But I guess everyone started to see what Benevidez is before I got it.
Yeah, no, I was certainly the same, mate. I thought the 25-pound jump was something to massively keep an eye on. I thought people were underselling it, to be totally honest. But and I thought the durability and the toughness of Zurdo, and like you said, he's improving, and also he's really settling in at 200 pounds. He looks like sort of the more comfortable way, even though, and he's huge anyway. Like, how he ever made 168? He's out of control. But
and they've only ever lost to Bivol, who is, a great of the era, a really, really good fighter, and absolutely no shame in losing to a fighter like that.
Yeah, absolutely, mate. So I sort of thought it would go the distance. I favoured Benevidez, maybe 60-40, something like that. But I certainly wasn't expecting just the absolute thrashing that took place. But I'm a biased Australian, and I'll never apologise for it, but I will admit it up front. And you took another one of my segues, mate. So you're still doing my work for me. But I just can't believe how everyone's writing off Jai Opetaia in this fight, seemingly, at least from the American side, from what I can see. Like, you talk about two polar opposites in terms of style, Jai and Zurdo. And I always like Jai really big against Zurdo as well. It's like, as you mentioned, the only loss against Dimitri Bivol. Yep. Like, who's the only cruiserweight on the planet that can move like Dimitri Bivol? Jai Opetaia. Well, I really like Jai in that, but again, I put my biased Australian cards on the table. But how do you see Jai fitting in that mix now with Benevidez?
I would still make Opetaia the favourite. I have been concerned for him for a little while. Look, not unlike you, I'm really big admirer of Opetaia. He's not just a very entertaining fighter, he's a really good fighter. And actually, I think a little underrated in terms of how good he is and his boxing ability. And that's because he kind of takes risks a little bit as well. But the thing is, I thought for a while, the time will come when we see Opetaia at heavyweight. Not that I expect him to be a generational heavyweight by any respects, but I think he's good enough to go up there and compete and earn really good money. My concern for Opetaia would be him, and I understand why he wants to do it, and I'd still like for him to achieve it, wants to win the Undisputed title at cruiserweight, and that might delay how long he gets heavyweight, and he might not be the fighter he is. And I already think we're seeing Opetaia at the peak of his powers, and we'll start to see some decline soon. But yeah, Benevidez's only fight at cruiserweight is against a former super middleweight, and as destructive as he is, that's very different to doing that to someone like Opetaia, who, again, I think is capable of competing against plenty of heavyweights. And I don't think you would, like, Ramirez got intimidated in that fight, which again is the thing that I think about this fight more than anything else, and actually ended up overshadowing even Inoue Nakatani a little bit, is the statement Benevidez made. That was a real statement. And I think a lot of the boxing fraternity was kind of ready for that statement, which kind of made it even more powerful in a lot of respects. But I don't see Opetaia getting intimidated by Benevidez in the way that Ramirez did. And we'll have to, if Benevidez does anything similar to Opetaia, then to what he did to Ramirez, then we've got a very special fighter on our hands indeed. The other thing I always think about with Benevidez is the extent to which he hung around and chased Alvarez and didn't get Alvarez. And let's not forget the WBC's role in that, because they very willingly didn't strip Alvarez for a very long time. Then he moved up to light heavyweight when we should have been having a trilogy fight between Beterbiev and Bivol, and then they saw fit to strip Bivol to make sure Benevidez got his shot. But the fight that should have happened, to my mind, still is Benevidez, Alvarez, for a number of reasons. Benevidez is his very marketable star. Not unlike when both De La Hoya and Mayweather and Pacquiao both beat De La Hoya. It launched their careers. That could have done that for Benevidez, but I also think as time went on, and not there's any shame in Alvarez losing to Terence Crawford, who's an incredible fighter, and obviously passed his peak by the time he fought Crawford anyway. But I think as time goes on, because of the career we're increasingly expecting Benevidez to have, I think we'd all have given Alvarez a lot of credit for being the one to fight Benevidez when he didn't have to, even if he'd lost. And I think losing to Benevidez would have harmed Alvarez's career that much less than it would losing to Crawford. But such is the WBC, such is it, so Alvarez, so on and so forth.
That's a conversation we could have on another couple of podcasts, mate. That whole rehashing of that situation. But yeah, incredibly, in summary, an incredibly impressive performance from David Benevidez, and for a biased Australian fans' sake, all of us over this side of the world, we hope that Jai's deal with Zuffa doesn't preclude him from that fight, which it seemingly from the outside looking in looks like it is. I'm not saying Benevidez is ducking anyone, but he has mentioned that why would I fight this Zuffa guy, and that's fair enough. Business is business, but hopefully someone can come to the table that's got a ton of money and make that thing happen, which isn't out of the realms of possibility. But Declan, we'll move on because you covered this event in person, so I'm really keen to get your thoughts. And I'm really keen to get your thoughts because to put my cards on the table, I haven't even seen these fights. And the reason I haven't watched these fights, by the way. I know, I wrote this down though, and this speaks to an overwhelming problem in boxing just with the proliferation of pay-per-view.
Yeah, I see where this is going. Yeah, go on.
It's out of control, so I'll just go through it real quick, because people who listen to this pod love it when I rant about pay-per-views. In the space of 4 days, I spent $200 on boxing pay-per-views. So we had Inoue, Nakatani, and Benevidez Zurdo were both $50 pay-per-views in Australia. Also had a local show at the Melbourne Pavilion. Shout out to Kai Hodgson, who picked up a great second-round knockout over Jason Medawar on that fight. That was a $40 stream on the internet for a local show, which was out of control, but, you know, I'm a supporter of Kai. And then we had a Nikita Zoo pay-per-view 2 days later on a Wednesday night for $60.
Yep.
The following weekend, this one was, you know, the Australian time difference. It started at 3 a.m. It was another 50. I was like, man, I've got to draw the line somewhere. I love boxing, but, you know, this is getting ridiculous. So anyway, I've been looking on the internet ever since to find some replays of 2 fights in particular. You can probably guess which ones they are. Haven't been able to find them yet, so I'm relying purely on the highlights videos, which I don't think is enough to formulate actual opinions on. So anyway, that's my preamble. I'll throw it to you, Declan. Wardley V Dubois, was it as good of a fight as what I've read and heard about?
It was as dramatic a fight as what you've read and heard about. Whether it's as good as a fight depends on what you like in a fight. It was, you couldn't take your eyes off it. It was incredibly entertaining, but the quality wasn't as high as you would ideally want from a world heavyweight title fight. And it did go on for too long. So just particularly from, and I don't like to use the word because I think it's incredibly dismissive and it's increasingly used in a dismissive way. But if you're a casual fan, it might end up being the fight of the year. For someone who watches as much boxing as yourself, you might have been watching for at least the last couple of rounds thinking, okay, let's end this. And the more boxing you watch and the more you become aware of the damage boxing does to fighters, the more there's probably something wrong with you if you're still watching those last 2 rounds and just enjoying it instead of becoming concerned about the consequences for Wardley.
Well, and what were your thoughts live in the building? Did you have that concern, or was it? Yeah.
I mean, so the reality is when you're on deadline like that, pretty much within minutes of the fight finishing, my copy needed to be sent. So you almost don't have time to think. You just do. What I remember thinking quite quickly afterwards when I'd finished fighting was that was actually quite, it sounds so harsh, but disappointing from Wardley. The bravery he showed above and beyond, by the way, and no one can ever give him enough credit for that. Disappointing from Wardley insofar as, and I think what happened is he hurt Dubois with pretty much his first right hand, and I think that just made him focus just endlessly on the right hand. If that didn't happen, and I do think it is what happened, then he has regressed as a boxer because he was a much better boxer against Joseph Parker when he wasn't just focusing on the right hand. But because he was so very one-dimensional, it made it quite easy for Dubois, who has an underrated jab and is incredibly powerful. And if anything, Wardley made him look like he wasn't as powerful as he was with that remarkable punch resistance, to just box in, I wouldn't say a composed way, but in quite a professional way, and ended up winning pretty much every minute of every round. That wasn't the 2 times he got knocked out. But of course the fight, and quite rightly, became about Wardley's bravery, because repeatedly I watched him thinking, how are you doing this? Dubois is one of the biggest punchers in the world. And it also reached a point where it's like, A, how are you staying up on your feet? This is almost freakish. B, why are you being allowed to stay on your feet? But it's a memorable fight. I don't think Wardley can hope to be the same at the back of it. You can't take a beating like that, and he's had a tough career before now. Let's not forget. But I do think the demand for a rematch will be great. I wouldn't object to him getting that rematch. I think he deserves it in a lot of respects. And when it happens, A, I hope he doesn't take that kind of punishment. B, I hope he's not as right-hand happy as he was, because I think it's a more competitive matchup than it looked on the night. I actually made Wardley a narrow favourite up until fight week when I changed my mind, which doesn't necessarily reflect well on me because, you know, we're meant to be certain about these things, but it's often a good sign if you can't make your mind up. The reason I made Wardley a favourite is because Wardley has a habit of coming from behind to win. Wardley has that heart. And because Dubois, let's face it, has some quit in him. And then fight week comes around. Sometimes the closer you get to a fight, the more your thoughts get crystallised. And I start to think, no, Dubois is the superior boxer here, and Dubois has the bigger hands. And I stand by that, even though Dubois was the one who went down and Woodley stayed up. But I thought Dubois would end up stopping him, not in that fashion, in the more traditional fashion. But yeah, really good fight, really memorable, and the sort of one that kind of stays with you for a few days afterwards.
And I believe, I'm not sure if it's been officially enacted, but Fabio Wardley's declared, I think, that he intends to enact the rematch clause. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Fighters have a small window of opportunity in which to do that typically. And it doesn't surprise me he's done that. And also it helps promotionally while the fight's still fresh and in people's minds. And that's not in the least bit surprising. Not least because, look, it's not that long ago. I thought Fraser Clark would win the rematch with Wardley based on the nature of the first fight they had. It's not that long ago we thought Wardley might have been reaching his glass ceiling. So he has already had a terrific career. If he gets the money for 2 world heavyweight title fights out of his career, he surpassed the expectations of almost all of us. And the most important thing, and particularly now he's won a title and he has a legacy of sorts, the most important thing for any fighter, particularly given how dangerous their occupation is to earn as much money as possible. So in most respects, probably right to go for a rematch, even though it comes with a lot of concerns. But now the thing to do is to try and drag those extensions out, any negotiations that happen for as long as possible. Postpone this rematch for as long as possible. A fighter, after being in a fight like Woodley has, should be having a year out. Not least because, I was swollen shut, right? I was swollen shut. But the cut to his nose, we've seen happen before in the fight with Fraser Clark. So you've got recurring injuries happening here as well. He needs to heal from this as much as possible. But we're hearing talks of a stadium fight. And if that's going to happen in the UK, let's face it, it should. You're taking a risk. I know Tyson Fury has fought in a stadium in December, but I mean, quite often it feels like this is Tyson Fury's universe and we're all just living in it. A stadium fight shouldn't be happening in the UK, probably beyond September. It starts to become a risk in October, and that is not the kind of recovery time Wardley will want. And the reality is, even those working with Wardley, a lot of those will prioritise the money as well, and this fight will have to happen sooner rather than later to maximise the money involved in it. Not least because, by the way, if Dubois fights between now and a rematch, he could lose his title. So I think I've got a bad feeling we might see that fight sooner than me ought to.
Yeah, well, I can't wait till someone puts it up on YouTube so I can watch the full fight. But yeah, well, thanks for supplying that context for me, because, you know, I've only just seen the highlights. It's very difficult to understand the full extent of what happened throughout the full extent of the rounds there. But also on the undercard, where is my BoxRec tab?
Do you know what? You said something that reminded me of something I should have said, which I thought was really interesting as the fight was unfolding. The referee was none other than Howard Foster Jr., who refereed Froch 1, a classic fight, also in Manchester. But that night, I don't think there's any doubt that Foster intervened and rescued Groves when he was well ahead. Well, not well ahead, but ahead, and didn't need rescuing in that moment. The time, I think, would have come when Groves needed rescuing. But what he did that night was stop an incredibly entertaining fight in a way that was unsatisfactory for almost all concerned, and he got a lot of abuse for that. And the criticism for that, I think he still carries around with him. People, even before Wardley Dubois, people would refer to Howard Foster as the ref from Froch 1. I think he carries those scars around with him now, and I think that was evident in that fight because twice he asked for the doctor's intervention, have a look at his injuries. It surprised me the doctor allowed him to carry on, but I think that was Foster wanting someone else to take the decision out of his hands because he knew that the fight would have been stopped. And eventually, to his credit, just about it was Foster who intervened and stopped the fight. But I think he knew, and I think he wanted the doctor to be the one to do it so that he wasn't, again, responsible for stopping a really entertaining fight. But that doesn't, as much as the doctor should have done it, to my mind, easy for me to say, I don't have any medical qualifications, as much as Foster ought to have done it, I think Wardley's corner ought to have done it as well. And I get why they didn't, because he's come from behind before against your man, Justice Hooney, for example, against Joseph Parker. But as much as they know that he has the capacity to do that, he was exhausted. He hadn't won. He'd won so little of the fight up to that point, and they should have been looking at him and saving him for another day. Not least, I believe it was at the start of the 10th round, and this was at the point where it became really alarming. Wardley had been hurt once again at the end of the 9th, at a point where you kind of thought maybe throwing a towel here, rescue him. Then he has a minute to sit down in between rounds, and he stood back up, and then Foster said, no, you're going to go and speak to the doctor. And he was wobbling on his feet as he made his way to the doctor. If you're still hurt, and that would have been exhaustion as well as just taking a beating. But if you're still hurt after being sat down for a minute in between rounds, everyone saw what they needed to see. Ben Davison has since said he didn't see that, which I get, and I believe. If you see a statement, it's saying they're talking to each other and saying, we decided. We were talking about whether we should be putting a towel in, and it's unfortunate that conversation happened as Wardley wobbled. But the doctor saw what he saw, the ref saw what he saw. Yeah, towel should have come in before it did.
Well, there seems to be a lot of whatever the opposite of uniformity is in British refereeing. I mean, like you mentioned the Justice Hooney Fabio Wardley fight. Like, I personally, I'm a biased Australian, but I thought that was a horrible stoppage. Like, Hooney won every second of that fight, and sure enough, he walked into a shot, he got hit. Credit to Fabio Wardley for pulling it off, but he gets hit with the big shot. He's getting to his feet, and the ref waves it off as he's standing up. Like, mate, you can't finish the count, look and see if his eyes are clear. That was a horrible stoppage to me. Wardley may have stopped him anyway in the preceding seconds if the fight was to continue, but Justice Hooney was robbed of that opportunity. And it just jogged my memory when you were talking about that. Who was the ref? It might have been the same guy. Wasn't there a fight with Lewis Ridson a couple of years ago where the corner threw the towel and the ref grabbed the towel and threw it back? Was that the same?
No. The fight you described there that reminds me of Graham L versus Michael Katsidis.
Did it happen in that fight too, did it?
Yeah. Graham L was, I think it was Graham L was getting a bit of a beating. The towel went in and the ref looked at him and said, no, it's okay, threw the towel back out, and Graham L started to fight back.
Amazing. Unbelievable.
I do remember a controversial stoppage in the career of Lewis Ritson, but I'm struggling to remember what fight that was.
I may have the fighters mixed up. Yeah.
Eventually you watch one too many fights and eventually it will start defending the match.
Absolutely, but that's all right. Everyone has a bad day at the office. But, mate, also on that undercard, the fight I wanted to talk about, Zak Chelli with an incredible stoppage of David Morrell. Again, I've only seen the 3.5-minute highlight reel, but I've watched it about 15 times. Mate, can you provide some context for those 10 rounds of the fight? Yeah, amazing. Right,
yeah, so a couple of weeks before that, maybe a little longer before that, David Morrell was due to fight Callum Smith in what
that was such a good fight too. Damn it.
A really appealing matchup. I say this as one of Smith's bigger. Actually, I'd say this is probably one of Morrell's bigger fans as well. I really liked it, and I also feared for Smith. Not that I thought it was a fight Smith wasn't capable of winning at his peak, but I was already concerned that Smith might have been past his peak by the time he fought Joshua Buatsi. I made him a favourite to win that fight, but not with any real confidence, and he did win, and it was a terrific win. But that was a really bruising fight. And when they were talking about putting him in Morrell, I was like, what are the odds of Smith having declined off the back of sharing a ring like he did with Buatsi? And Morrell was a fighter who'd only ever lost to Benevidez, officially at least. And actually that kind of brings us to some of what we were talking about earlier. But we still thought ultimately that Morrell was on his way up. And there's no doubt Morrell was a talented fighter, and he got matched with Chelli because he missed out on the Smith fight. But ultimately, that was a keep busy fight for Morrell, and in front of a British audience, because it's no secret they were attempting to rearrange the fight with Callum Smith, and Callum Smith was there ringside.
I didn't know that.
Which is you know, a reminder of what was ultimately a plan, being planned, and what Zak Chelli disrupted. I, like almost everyone, didn't give Chelli any thought of victory, any chance of victory. I thought we'd see Morrell record a relatively routine win, not least because this was at light heavyweight and Chelli had previously come up from super middleweight as well. And
I didn't know that. Okay.
The same applies to Callum Smith, but Callum Smith was a monstrous super middleweight whose time there was always limited. Yeah, and it started. I mean, Morrell looked sluggish quite early on, but I think most of us watching thought this was complacency. This was him, as fighters often do, knowing they don't necessarily have to be at their best to secure victory. And reflection, that does a massive disservice to Zak Chelli. It's not my job to do justice to the reputation of Zak Chelli, but even when it carried on being more competitive into the middle rounds, you still thought it was far from so one-sided in Chelli's favour that you thought there's going to be an upset here. You still thought the time would come when Morrell would find another gear and start to pull away. I believe it was a 10-round fight, and it was in the 9th round where Chelli hurt him. Morrell backed up against the ropes, was struggling to defend himself. The ref was taking a look, and then the round ended, and the ref was right not to finish the fight. He was hurt, but he wasn't so hurt that the time would come. But when that round ends, you think Chelli's missed his chance here. That's such a shame. And I say this more for benefit of hindsight, but credit to Chelli, because A, in that moment when he had him hurt, he didn't lose his composure and become wild and try to force a stoppage. B, he came out at the start of the 10th and he didn't try to capitalise too much on what he did in the previous round. He kind of stuck to what worked for him. Hurt him again, hurt him more seriously. This time started putting the pressure on, but not in a way, again, that was by any means amateurish, and it reached the point where he kind of finished what he was doing in the round before. Morrell was struggling up against the ropes, struggling to defend himself. This time he was hurt more, and this time the ref intervened and was right to do so. Incredible win, changes his career. But I have to say, I don't think we'll see Morrell come back from that, not at the level he was at before, because when he was matched with Benevidez, it was an interesting fight, an intriguing fight. He was right to be the underdog in that fight, but it was appealing. In his next fight, he arguably deserved to lose a decision. He's lost to Chelli, and now, to almost come back to the start of the podcast, you're looking at Benevidez and thinking, wow, you're a career changer. It's not a good thing to share the ring with you. I don't think Morrell will be the same again. I hope Chelli gets a good fight off the back of it, a good payday. It wouldn't stun me if he ends up being matched with Callum Smith.
So do you think, and congratulations to Chelli, and I don't mean to overlook him, and again, I can't wait to see the full version of that fight, because, get the whole context of it with my own eyeballs, but thanks for providing your account, Declan. That helps paint a better picture. But with Morrell, it's like, I thought Amami Katayev actually turned pro in Australia and was based in Sydney for, I think, his first 5 or 6 fights. So we saw a little bit of him. I mean, I'm not going to say I wasn't impressed. I certainly was, but he didn't look to me to be like an immediate world champion or anything like that. Yeah. I thought he was defensively flawed, even as he continued to get fights overseas. I thought when that fight with Morrell got announced, I was like, oh, perfect bounce back, tough guy, great amateur record, really good reputation. Morrell should be able to capitalize on those defensive flaws. He was not. I was really looking forward to the Callum Smith fight. That didn't play out. The fight with Chelli, I haven't seen, but from the highlights, he just kept getting hit with the right hand. Do you think it's more of a case of finding Morrell's limit, or possibly Morrell not being to quote unquote get up for not big names, or maybe is he just not suited for light heavyweight? Like, what do you sort of attribute those couple of performances recently from Morrell to?
I think it's sharing the ring with Benevidez. I think there are some fighters. I mentioned Anthony Yard earlier, who shared the ring with Benevidez. I don't think he'll be the same off the back of that. He's got a chance, because I think his next move might be to go to cruiserweight, and it might favour him. But the reason I mentioned Yard is because he hasn't been the same since Beterbiev. Sometimes you just have these destructive fighters who you take a risk getting into the ring with, and it's often the right thing to do. But when that risk doesn't pay off, you're never the same. And I think that's what we're seeing with Morrell. The other thing is Morrell comes from what is still in a lot of respects unpredictable, but very rightly celebrated Cuban amateur system. And sometimes fighters come out of that system looking really, really, really good. Mike Perez, who weirdly was on the undercard that night in Manchester and Wardley V Dubois, being prominent among them, looked a really good fighter. Went to Adam Booth, who I think's a terrific trainer, and it just didn't work out. And I asked Adam, like, what happened there? He looked like he had it all, and he said he's shot. He's been in the Cuban system for too long. He's physically shot, and that happens when you spend too much time in the amateur setup. Sometimes people look at professional records and say, this guy's 12-0, how can he be declining already? And it's because of what they've given in the process of reaching their professional debut in the first place. And I think there's a good chance Morrell is just giving the best of himself. And when he shared the ring with Benevidez, that just accelerated it.
Wow, man, that's such a great point. And just thinking back in my mind, like to the career of Benevidez, it's like, yeah, has he beat anyone that's really prospered post fighting him? Not that I can think of off the top of my head. I'd have to box record, but wow, that's a very interesting point, mate. Well, let's move on to the next topic, Declan. Again, I'm a biased Australian. Matchroom, one of the biggest global promoters in the world, based in the UK, in your neck of the woods, mate, has had a couple of shows in Australia from time to time, but they haven't exactly planted their flag until now. They've DAZN, as you would know, having spent time here, which we'll get to, has bought our main pay TV carrier over here. They now own Fox Sports and the streaming arm KO, and Matchroom have signed a 7-fight deal with Fox Sports and KO, now owned by DAZN, to really plant the flag and pump out a lot of shows this year. So, mate, what do you, mate? You've sat back in the UK and watched Matchroom break into different markets in the world. How, to your eye, how seriously do you think they're taking the Australian market?
Probably a lot more seriously than their promotions would suggest if you compare those promotions to those they host elsewhere, which already sounds much more of a scathing criticism than I intended to be. I've spoken to Eddie Hearn about this a few times because I've been interested about it, and Eddie Hearn says a lot of things and says a lot of things convincingly, but I do believe those ambitions are serious and have been for some time. And it's just, so I think there's two things that are particularly relevant here. I think Matchroom, I'm not saying they're the best promoters in the world, I think Matchroom promote more effectively geographically than any other promoter in the world. They take their fighters regularly to their hometowns and try to build something there and make a bit of a base in that hometown more than any other promoter does, to my mind. Quite often, and I get it, because if it pays off, why wouldn't you? But quite often a promoter will find the closest convenient territory to stage a fight, and Matchroom don't do that, and it doesn't always pay off. But I can remember attending a Regis Prograis fight in New Orleans, and it didn't quite make the impact they want, but there's kind of an ambition there to I guess do what the right thing is for the fighter. And I'm not saying that Matchroom put the fighter first before the promotion. No promoter ever does. But they do a good job of that. The flip side of this is I think they've stretched themselves too thin, ultimately. The American market is a huge one, huge, and a difficult one to break into, particularly at the time they were breaking into it when Golden Boy and Top Rank were, and PBC were as influential as they were, and to most degrees remain. And I think what you saw, Matchroom's impact when Eddie Hearn first really went for it in the UK market was incredible. Really changed the nature of British boxing. And at one point they were the UK's leading promoter, and then they've gone into the US, and their influence has waned in the UK because it's just too difficult to conquer all these territories at once. And I think that is what's held them back with Australia, more than them not actually having the ambition to do anything there, because they've been planning this for a long time. But it's interesting, you used the words, they've kind of planted a flag. And when we were talking about before this, you sent an agenda across, and that was Matchroom's expansion into Australia. I'm not. Do we consider this an expansion into Australia suddenly, or is this not what they've done previously, dressed up slightly differently? They first went there. They had the fights with George Kambosos, who's a big name and seems an obvious one to lead that kind of expansion with. And then they had their agreement with Tasman Fighters. And I remember speaking to Eddie Hearn about that, and him saying it made so much sense to have someone like Tasman on the ground taking care of so much of logistics. And I've really oversimplified what he says there. That makes him sound like he's doing a disservice to Tasman, like they were just a proxy for him, and that's not what he was getting at all. But it did make sense if a collaboration between the two of them worked, because Tasman have a very good and underrated stable, that they could start to achieve some of the things that Matchroom was struggling to achieve because of geography. And that didn't, and that my understanding is it didn't end up favouring Tasman. Tasman didn't feel the benefit of that. So fair enough, Matchroom have now gone into, they've, I guess, relaunched at best via Fox Sports instead of DAZN. But they will need to build some momentum now, because I don't think you can keep relaunching. But the thing I think they do have on their side, and you'll know more about this than me, I'd actually be interested to hear what you say. Firstly, it is my opinion that they are better served on Fox Sport than DAZN, because as in a lot of places, the hardcore, the likes of us, we're aware of DAZN. A lot of places aren't aware of DAZN, and on an outlet like Fox Sport, you get cross promotion. People watching Fox for different reasons will be made aware of these fights in a way that they wouldn't if a fight was on DAZN necessarily. But I believe there's also Wi-Fi isn't necessarily the best in everywhere in Australia, and that could potentially have been holding DAZN back, whereas I guess that's not a problem for Fox Sport.
Yeah, I think our internet is ranked like 70th in the world or something. Yeah, we have horrible internet. Which anyone who listens or watches this pod will know that firsthand. Terrible internet,
right.
Which is
so I mean that's very difficult thing for DAZN to conquer, because it's not DAZN's fault there isn't great Wi-Fi in Australia, right?
Yeah.
So it feels like things are in place for them better than they were when they were launching with Kambosos first time around, but I think they need a better stable to achieve what they want to achieve. I know they've still got a stake, so to speak, in Terramana, which is valuable, but he's not at that headlining stage of his career just yet. Losing off a tire to, well, it was first to Tasman, but then
the timing on that just.
It wouldn't. I'm just speculating here, but it wouldn't at all surprise me if, when things were being agreed with Fox, that Opataya was a big part of that picture. I can't help but think perhaps Matchroom need kind of permanent representation in Australia to try to build something, but that's quite difficult to do right now, because No Limit are the leading promoter there and making things appealing in their own way, not least because you mentioned they stage a lot of pay-per-view fights, and pay-per-view fights
exclusively pay-per-view.
And Tasman have their deal now with Stan, which makes Tasman more appealing than ever. And I'm also speculating here, but because of Opataya's link up with Zuffa, that probably will lead to Tasman giving even more opportunities to their fighters who aren't Opataya. So what Matchroom are trying to achieve is difficult, but Eddie Hearn is nothing if not persistent and hardworking. And look, maybe being a third best promoter in Australia is fine if at least there's some consistency to it, and there hasn't been consistency so far. But again, they've relaunched, so maybe that's to come.
Yeah, it's certainly going to be interesting. I was told a couple of years ago by someone I really trust, and I do believe definitely, but I probably shouldn't say who it is publicly. They told me at any time there's only roughly about 300 registered pros in Australia. And sometimes that swells and sometimes it goes down. You know, that's the sport. But roughly we've got 300 active boxers in the male boxers in the country at any one time. It's like, does more segregation? Does another promotional company make that better? I don't know. Time will tell, but it's interesting. But you sort of gave us a breakdown there, Declan, of your thoughts on the scene. And obviously you spent a few months in Australia quite recently, so you're the perfect man to sort of ask this question to.
I'm not sure I'd go that far, but go ahead.
Well, you're the only person I'm going to ask it to, so we'll see how we go. But, mate, what did you make of the Australian boxing scene? Like, was it what you thought it was looking from afar and then actually being here and being consumed by it and coming from the UK, which, you know, boxing is a much higher up the totem pole than it is in Australia. Like, what did you make of the Aussie scene from the time you spent in it?
It's an interesting question because I'm struggling to recall what I thought of it from afar. What I definitely recognised from afar, for which I was grateful ahead of spending that time there, was you are in all likelihood in the golden era of Australian boxing, and all those fighters we're talking about, they might just be on the other side of the mountain now and on their ways down as opposed to on the way up, but it's still a very good time. And to be honest, even if we go back to a time when physically these fighters might have been better, I think promotionally they're better known than ever. So to weigh things up, maybe that's better from at least my perspective when I'm trying to write about these people. What I really appreciated about being there was the access. The access from all these promoters was really good. I could write whatever I wanted. I didn't feel under pressure. I could speak to whoever I wanted, even people at the top of the bill, when I was given what I like to think was appropriate time to do so. Of course, I like to think that because I have an agenda. But you have also, between us now, actually, we've touched on a couple of times, what I kind of think is probably the biggest problem, and this might be me being a little Englander and not knowing enough about the Australian fight scene. Or about Australia in general, but some of the fights that end up on pay-per-view, I'm like, whoa, this to me is the sort of fight that should be on free to air to try and, because I don't think it's appropriate to charge a pay-per-view fee for this fight, because we're always told that pay-per-view exists to make the fights that otherwise would be beyond our reach. And when that's Fury Usyk, fine. When, for example, that's the most recent Nikita Tszyu fight, as entertaining a fighter as I think Tszyu is, and as much as I'd like him to realise his potential, and I get the impression I think he's got more potential than most. I don't think that was a fight that should have been on pay-per-view. The past Maloney fight shouldn't have been on pay-per-view, and I'm a big fan of both of them. And I mean, this is a worldwide thing in boxing. Every boxing promoter is as short-termist as possible. It's always, let's get the most out of this next fight and then worry about what we do after that. So it doesn't really matter, and this is not an Australian thing, this doesn't really matter if we know we are selling this inaccurately. Let's cash in now while there is some interest in this fight, and if it ends up disappointing and a lot of the people who pay for that don't want to pay for another fight again, we'll worry about that afterwards. And to be honest, the bubble never really bursts in that context, does it? We're all kind of gullible enough and we all want to see these fights enough that we end up paying for them. But, and again, I'm kind of projecting here the boxing ecosystem I've long observed in the UK, which is that typically, not always, because Sky Sports particularly had a damaging era, I thought, when some of the early Amir Khan fights were on box office when they shouldn't have been, because they were capitalising on Khan's popularity. Yeah, Khan Dimitri Salita, for example, I believe was box office, and that shouldn't have been a box office fight. But there were fights, for example, when you're talking about Floyd Mayweather, Ricky Hatton, that's pay-per-view. Costa-Rica, Ricky Hatton, that's pay-per-view. I always thought it should be the upper tier fights that should be pay-per-view. And for Ricky Hatton's probably a really good case study there, because he was allowed to become popular in the most natural way. Build him, put him on a lot of bills. Let's let the biggest possible audience see him fight, buy into his career, so that by the time we let him off the leash, say, against Costa, as many of those as possible want to see him fight. I question regularly in Australian boxing whether, for example, putting Nikita Tszyu behind a smaller audience, instead of letting them see how entertaining he is. So it's no secret that No Limit hopes to get him to world level, which is the right thing to be doing. He might not prove good enough to win a world title, but I'm almost certain that if he fights for a world title, he'll be an entertaining opponent while he's in there, an entertaining challenger while he's in there. In an ideal world, I think you put him onto a wider audience, let them get behind him, let them start to appreciate him, then you put him in the pay-per-view fights, then you charge for the fights. The first fight I covered in Australia was Opeta and Ika, which is a really entertaining fight. I was also told that week that UFC pay-per-views sell much more convincingly in Australia than boxing pay-per-views. And that doesn't surprise me because, and I'm far from a fan of the UFC, but if you're putting your very best fighters behind a paywall before they're at their peak, then you are undermining your ability to build their reputations.
Oh, totally, mate. I think you've absolutely nailed it completely. And I've ranted heaps. I did it a little bit earlier, but way more aggressively about the Australian pay-per-view strategy, I guess you would call it. And I always used to blame, like, particularly the promoters. So for this instance, No Limit. But I've kind of really changed my mind in the last 12 months or so. I actually think it's a Foxtel-driven business practice, and obviously, and this only proved it to me even more. A part of the 7-fight deal with Matchroom that includes 4 pay-per-views. Like, if there's anyone on the planet that knows that they shouldn't be doing pay-per-views in Australia, it's Eddie Hearn and Matchroom. But I think that was just a part of the deal from Foxtel saying, look, we want to have you. Do you want to come on board? We're the biggest in Australia. But if you do it, we want return on investment immediately. We don't care about the growth of this sport. And as soon as people stop buying, you'll be off TV. So, come and have some fun while you can. But that doesn't lead to longevity, and it doesn't lead to growth, exactly to your point.
Yeah.
So we're in a pretty spicy predicament at the moment, but it'll be interesting to see what happens. But
particularly at a time now when there are so many fighters worth following in Australia. The Zurafa farce is a real shame because you could just about justify that being on pay-per-view. And obviously, it's too early to say so with any conviction, but you could look at that and say that was turning into what was going to be a good fight. And if that had delivered, then that makes so many things better. If Zoo wins a really entertaining fight, then you could argue on paper that he has to be a pay-per-view fighter year after. I wouldn't do that. But that ended up being, through no fault of the promoters, a real disappointment. And I fear it causes more harm than good. What I would say, by the way, about all that, I've developed a soft spot, I guess, for the commentary teams in Australia, which I think are far better than we sometimes endure in the UK right now. And I would definitely say, so I've questioned in the past couple of years, am I dealing with the worst lot of press officers in the UK that I've known during my career? The access I've been given in Australia, the help from the press officers in Australia has been really good. They do see the value of that.
That's good to hear.
And I've never heard anything about anything I've written, and it wouldn't have all been positive because it shouldn't all be positive. But I've never heard of anything I've been written being not being criticised, but like I've never been made aware that anything I've written hasn't gone down well. Whereas more UK over the past couple of years, I have got that, and I've had that in the US as well.
Yeah, well, that's a positive. But so you just what time frame did you spend here recently? Declan, when were you here?
I mentioned Opeta and Ika. I was there for a couple of months on and off then. And it's painful to say on and off because when the other location you're referring to is London, that's a long way to be going. And then I was there from mid-November to mid-February.
Awesome. And plans have come into that?
Just by coincidence, happened to be a really good time for fights out there because we had Opeta, we had Tim Tszyu, and then we had Nikita Tszyu, which was great. Couldn't have timed it better, but that was just good luck on my part. I do have plans to move back and permanently, probably by the end of the year. That's still to be determined. I probably ought to be a lot more organised about these things than I am. But
That's awesome, mate. Well, I mentioned before we started recording that you'd be a welcome addition permanently to the Australian boxing scene, mate. So we'd love to have you. But and I guess we sort of have to rip the Band-Aid off, Declan. You obviously been working for boxing scene for a while. There's been from at least what I can tell, some sort of restructuring. Some people have lost their positions, including yourself, mate, which is devastating. And obviously, friends of the show, Luke Cattell and Eric Raskin as well, which absolutely sucks for you guys and for us consumers as well, because you guys provided such great content. But I don't really want to delve into your personal business sort of in the ending of that working relationship, mate. But what sort of comes next? I know it's very new, and it's I'm asking you a question that you probably haven't or possibly haven't given a ton of thought to yet, but are there plans to pivot or start something new, or what have you got sort of in mind for the rest of the year?
I've given plenty of thought to it. I haven't got my head around it properly yet. Well, the move I just mentioned to you is probably the saving grace in this from a personal perspective, and forgive me if I sound selfish there, because I should say at this point, none of my colleagues deserve that. Like you say, they're very good lot. Which isn't a say, by the way, that I think any kind of disservice has been done by boxing scene. Boxing scene has been getting run at a loss for some time, partly because, or largely because, the value had been seen in having what had frankly become the only really independent written publication. But I know I did personally, and I know one or two colleagues at least did. We feared this coming at some point. We didn't know where it was going to be. Hoped it would be years as opposed to months or weeks or days. But from a business perspective, I get it. And look, we've all been paid. For example, you might have seen on online right now, there's been a lot of negative things being said against Boxing Social, and that's kind of disgraceful to bring people on and allow them to work and not pay them for it. This isn't by any stretch was what's happened at boxing scene. But to go back to what I was saying, the saving grace here was that I have plans to move to the other side of the world. The plan was to take the job with me, and I'd expected to be able to do so because they saw the value of the growing fight market in Australia. And again, for reasons I understand, that has now changed. But that was a luxury to potentially be in a position to do that. A lot of people, when they make a move like that, they make that move without bringing a job with them, and they are kind of quote unquote starting over when they make that move. And so if I'm going to lose my full-time position, it's and have to start over, it's kind of as kind of time to be doing it. And I'm actually this isn't the first time we've been made redundant. Journalism has been contracting since I've been a journalist, which has been over 15 years now, which is, again, kind of like you're never really surprised when these things happen, why you fear it coming. The last time this happened, I looked around the landscape and I thought I saw enough opportunities that I could rebuild, and fortunately did so. I look around the landscape now, certainly from if I was to be staying in London, and I would fear my ability to rebuild. Certainly if I wanted to stay full-time in boxing, which I do, because I used, for most of my career, I've been a football and boxing journalist, actually often more football than boxing because football's king over here. And I knew when I started to concentrate fully on boxing that I was potentially shooting myself in the foot. I knew that. But I also, I'd got bored of football, and I decided that boxing was what gave me the most satisfaction. So ideally, I want to continue doing that. But to go back to what I was just saying, I'm less pessimistic, I think, about the opportunities that might exist in Australia. It's far too early for me to say that, and I don't know nearly enough about Australia yet. But I see a glass ceiling here, and I think that glass ceiling, I'm hoping that glass ceiling would be higher in Australia. But the reality is, when I was looking at making that move, I was doing it for personal reasons. I knew it could be a bad idea professionally. I didn't think I wasn't optimistic to start with. It turned out I was given a positive answer when I asked, but I wasn't optimistic to start with that I'd be able to take the job with me. And I don't live to work, so I will figure the wider picture out as and when I'm in Australia, I guess.
Yeah. Well, mate, that totally sucks, the recent history that's happened to you personally and your colleagues as well, mate, that we mentioned, and people I didn't mention by name either, the whole team, everyone that unfortunately went through that. But glad to hear that there's still some positivity, mate, and a desire to work into boxing, because, as I said, as a consumer of your content, you're a massive asset to the sport, mate, and a really fun person who regularly puts out content that is enjoyable and informative, which we need that in a sport like boxing, and especially in Australia too, mate. So fingers crossed and all the best for when you get out here, mate. If there's anything I can do for you, let me know. Not that I have any real connections or anything like that, but would be happy to try and point you in any direction that you think I might be able to help you in. But
that's
mate,
very humbling. Thank you. And not a bad time to be hearing someone say that either, by the way. Thank you again.
No, not at all, mate. Not at all. But we'll try and sorry for bringing the mood down a bit there. we'll try and raise it back up, mate.
I'm usually the guy doing that, so don't worry. This is kind of nice not to be for a change.
Well, mate, we've got the heavyweight world champ fighting a kickboxer on the weekend, so if that isn't going to fire us up, what else would? Yeah. What do you make of the Pyramids of Giza fight tonight, Declan? Are you pumped up for it, mate? Or?
In a word, no.
Yeah, mate. So, like, Usyk in the kickboxer. Do you know anything about Rico Verhoeven? I don't mean to be dismissive of his abilities or his talents or anything like that, but I just don't follow kickboxing. I have no idea who this guy is.
I hadn't heard of him.
Yeah.
And I'm probably a little more willing to be dismissive of his abilities. Look, he might be great, and if he is, good for him and good for the sport. But I think it speaks volumes that this fight was the brainchild of Jason Statham, which is insane. And look, maybe Jason Statham's a lot more knowledgeable about boxing than I'm aware, but it just sounds like the kind of childish stuff that, to my mind, Turkey Yellow Sheikh loves to latch onto and thinks a great idea, and it really ends up being a good idea. Usyk is an all-time great heavyweight. We are waiting for the time to come where he starts to show signs of decline. It hasn't happened yet, and maybe it's about to, but that in itself is reason to be negative about his fight. If he's not showing any signs of decline, why would we match him with someone he's going to be such a big favourite against? And by the way, if and when he does start to show signs of decline, he is the consummate professional. I don't think complacency is ever likely to be one of Usyk's things. I think he will always. I think he is that consistent a trainer. Everything about his career up to date shows that. And I don't think. And while it'll be incredibly confident of in his fight, he must know he's going to win it. But I don't think he is so disrespectful that he would go through training in first gear. And I think probably partly because he probably knows that the day he starts doing that is the beginning of the end, even if it wouldn't be for this fight. But the thing that kind of catches it for me as well is the first face-off. There was no tension there whatsoever, no sense of rivalry, because Usyk knows what a big favourite he is. Rivalries tend to be built over lengthier periods of time than this one has, obviously, but Usyk knows what a favourite he is, and Verhoeven knows he's doing the fight that is by some distance going to earn him more than any other, and potentially might lead to him getting another semi-big fight and another semi-decent payday. So he has already won before the fight happens. And as we sometimes see in these circumstances, probably doesn't want to do too much to provoke Usyk as well. Not that I have any time for these kind of constructed rivalries we see, but there's a decent undercard. Some good, like the Casual Gearsov fight's good. I would happily write a preview for Casual Gearsov because it appeals to me, but because of how competitive it potentially is. But Usyk Verhoeven's just a waste of time. Not least because, again, not only are we talking about an all-time great heavyweight, we're talking about him at a time when there are still some very worthwhile opponents he could be sharing the ring with. Ajit Kabayel is, to my mind, the most worthy right now. Kabayel has paid his dues in all of the right ways. One once again, he is the leading contender with WBC, and once again, it was the WBC who were first to say Usyk can defend the title against Verhoeven, when we all know Verhoeven shouldn't be anywhere near there. But Cabello was being let down by the system. He's far from the first and will be far from the last. But if anyone should be earning his payday, it's Cabello. And by the way, not that I think he'd beat Usyk, but he'd be a very interesting opponent because he's young, fresh, appears to be fearless, and he's a very good body puncher. And we've been told for a long time now, and it's a myth to some degree, but we've been told for a long time now that Usyk's weakness is to his body. So that would sell. And if you put that, if you need to have the vanity project of the pyramids of Giza there, then that would be a good backdrop for a fight like that. But instead we have an all-time great heavyweight against a novice boxer, former kickboxer, who we have absolutely no reason to have any confidence in whatsoever.
Yeah, and also like the mobility of
How's that
Cabello.
for bringing the mood down, by the way?
Yeah, well, we're 1-1. We're even. But like the underrated mobility of Cabello too. Like I know he can get over aggressive and likes to stand in the pocket a lot too. But when he wants to move and cut angles, like could that be an interesting facet of someone's style to put up against Usyk, who has been able to outmaneuver these bigger guys? I think it certainly could be, but whether that fight happens.
I doubt that. Well, again, whether the fight happens it might be the more relevant question here. But I actually think Usyk's mobility is probably his greatest strength. And he succeeded in outmaneuvering Fury, who, though not quite at his peak by that point, Fury's not an immobile heavyweight by any stretch either.
That's true. That's true. Yeah.
So no, I don't think so. But Cabello deserves a shot. Cabello deserves the payday, and he's not getting it. And by the way, if we were speaking a few weeks ago, as much as I was looking forward to Wardley Dubois because I knew I was convinced it would be a shootout, I would have made Wardley an interesting opponent for Usyk, not because I would have by any stretch made him the favourite, but because A, you could argue he deserves it, certainly deserves it more than Verhoeven. B, because Wardley's so unorthodox because of his lack of experience. And look, you could say that about Verhoeven. I don't know enough about him as a fighter. I don't know how textbook or otherwise he actually is. So maybe I'm going to look stupid at the end of this, and maybe any listeners will say, well, why do you deserve to be so opinionated about it? It'd probably be fair to say so. But Wardley is unorthodox, and I thought the combination of Wardley being unorthodox and as powerful as he is would at least have given Usyk something to think about for a few rounds. Whereas I'm not sure we'll even see that this weekend. And I can honestly tell you, there's a good chance I won't watch it.
And it sort of brings up the whole, I guess the circus fight era kind of never left entirely, but it seems to be much more prevalent now than it has been in eras gone by. And everyone points out, it's always been a part of the sport. Everyone points out to Ali Inoue and all that type of stuff. But I guess my issue with it now, and you said it there too, it's a waste of time. And it is, I agree with you 100%, but it's also a waste of literal time because guys now compete less. They prepare longer and they have longer between fights. So not only back in the day, if a guy's fighting 4 or 5 times a year, it's like, all right, make one of those fights a circus fight, get your money, and then he's fighting a real contender in 3 months, But these ones, it's like when did Usyk fight last? I'd have to box record. It's been a while. I think it was the Dubois fight, wasn't it? Usyk's last fight?
Dubois rematch, July 2025.
There we go. So it's almost been a year. And, I'm by no means having a go at Usyk, but I'm just using Usyk as an example of what happens with everyone. And then he'll be off for a long time after this, and who knows what may happen to Cabello. It just wrecks the whole system, the way the whole thing's currently set up. So I agree, and I have really no enthusiasm for the fight on the weekend. But
the other thing you say, like, for example, when this was Ali we were talking about, and it's a lot of people get very misty-eyed about Ali, and I want to forgive him for all sorts of things. I get that, but that's not what this is. When Ali was having that fight, it wasn't sold as anything other than what it was, really. Let's find out what happens. We weren't being told this is the guy who can give Ali his greatest test, so on and so forth. Pay this money, invest in this to see this test. And it didn't stop people getting a chance against Ali. This was kind of in addition to what Ali was already doing. This is instead of, and that changes things considerably. Not least because, again, there will be an audience tuning into this who don't know enough about boxing from a boxing perspective. Or who am I say don't know enough about boxing? Boxing doesn't deserve a lot of people's time. But if from a boxing perspective you want to draw in a wider audience and get the benefits of that wider audience, and your chance of selling them a fight is Usyk Verhoeven, then there's a very good chance you're blowing it in the same way that you were blowing it with Jake Paul fighting Anthony Joshua and a lot of these other fights. I've got no time for it. I remember when the first fight along these lines of this era was Mayweather McGregor, and when it was first being spoken about, surely not. And then it actually happened. And kind of boxing just about got away with it because it wasn't quite as bad as I feared. But it certainly it taught us enough, right, this isn't worthwhile. And yet now they are getting worse and worse and more common. And it's just part and parcel of the picture. And it's a shame because there are a lot of really good fights that could be made, and there are a lot of really good fights that could benefit from that platform, and it could attract bigger crowds, but it won't happen.
Crazy. We've got Jason Statham to blame. But, mate, you mentioned the undercard. Jack Catterall, Shakram Giyasov, Hamza Shiraz, and Alan Begic, who I will put my hand up, I'm not familiar with. I've just gone through his box rec. But a couple of good fights on the undercard, mate. Also, kind of Australia's own, Egyptian/Australian May Solomon is challenging Mizuki Hiruta for the WBO World Super Flyweight female title. So there's a little bit on the undercard. What sort of, I'm imagining it's Hamza Shiraz and Jack Catterall that are really appealing to you, mate. What one are you most excited for?
It is, yeah. I think the Catterall Giyasov fight is the more competitive one. Giyasov was a really good amateur. I still think Catterall is a bit of an underrated boxer, and there'll probably be some of your audience thinking I'm giving Catterall far too much credit, which I just think is unfair. It's because people don't find him particularly entertaining. I get it, but Catterall's always been a very clean fighter, at least. I don't think his fights are by any stretch scrappy, and it's when the fight becomes scrappy that I've got no interest in watching them. But also, Catterall is going into this fight off the back of having, for his past fight, which he stopped Echo Esserman, obviously, worked with Derek Bozy Ennis in an attempt to become more aggressive. Now, he isn't working with Ennis for this fight. I'm told, I'm not sure the extent, I believe that. I'm told it's because of Bozy Ennis's commitment to training his son, Jaron Boots Ennis, for this very appealing fight we've got coming up against Xander Zayas. And that, by the way, when we're talking about fights like Usyk Verhoeven, isn't that the example of what we ought to be seeing? Two really good fighters at their physical peaks, taking risks, and
possibly early for Zayas. This is like back to Tommy Hearns days, you know? Yeah, this is fantastic.
That's the risk. And you would like to think, and I'm actually confident that if Ennis wins and it proves too early for Zayas, that we'll be like, well, he gambled against Ennis, no harm in that, let's rebuild. But yeah, he's not working with Ennis for this fight, having looked more aggressive against Esserman. So look, he may be more aggressive, he may not. He's working under Stephen Smith, but it's a very good fight. Giyasov was a really good amateur. And Jack Catterall's in the time of his career where he kind of has to make things happen now, or in terms of winning a world title, or he never will.
Mate, it's an interesting one. And who did you say, that Jack Catterall was training with now?
Stephen Smith, who I think shows promise. He's the older brother of Callum Smith, has been working with Charlie Edwards, has trained Chantel Cameron. Shows promise as a trainer, worked under Joe Gallagher, obviously. For this fight, he has also had the experienced Ross Amber in camp, and Stephen Smith has also been the assistant trainer to Callum Smith alongside, his name escapes me now, the American...
Buddy McGirt.
Buddy McGirt, exactly. Yeah. So I think Stephen Smith has the makings of a good trainer. And I'm guessing there's a chance he ends up becoming Catterall's long-term trainer if this fight goes to plan. Giyasov, by the way, I'm surprised because I conducted some interviews around this fight to try and help preview it. Giyasov, A, did one of the most impressive things I've ever seen in a boxing ring. B, probably the most touching thing I've ever seen in a boxing ring. But see, it's also something that doesn't appear to be as widely known as I'd expected. I guess.
Yeah, I don't know what you're referring to.
When you end up in a boxing bubble. I was in Atlantic City for the Ennis Stanionis fight. Giasov fought on the undercard, which was an eliminator for the WBA title, which is one of the titles Ennis and Stanionis were fighting for. A matter of weeks before that fight happened, his baby daughter died. He decided to go ahead with the fight anyway, which felt like a risk because you're like, this is a big opportunity for you. If you lose this for the wrong reasons because you're not in the right headspace, and it's entirely understandable that you wouldn't be in the right headspace, you could have some serious rebuilding to do. Instead, he won that night very touchingly because he was in Uzbekistan fighting on the east coast of the US. I wasn't expecting the crowd there to necessarily know a great deal about him. He got cheered quite loudly to the ring that night, which I found touching.
Yeah.
Cheered loudly when he won because people knew what he'd endured. And then he did his post-fight interview, burst into tears, inevitably, I guess. He's been kind of sat on the shelf since then. And I've just kept half an eye on his career since then because of the impression that chapter made on me. And I think he's a good opponent.
Yeah. Oh, mate, I didn't know anything about that. That certainly, makes him much more of an endearing character, that's for sure. And, I guess I always found Giasov a little awkward, a little bit up and down. I never could really, get a handle of you see some guys and you can sort of see the ceiling or you can see the potential. With Giasov, I'm like, I know it's there, but I can't really, see it. Maybe that's just my own limitations or whatever, but it wasn't a guy I was certainly really high on. And to your point about Jack Catterall, I'm the same. I think he gets a bit of a rough ride, Some southpaws just fight like, orthodox guys in a mirror, but some southpaws really fight like southpaws. Catterall's a real tricky southpaw. He throws that left hand. He's really bladed. He throws that left hand really sneakily. Comes from a weird angle. He's a real tricky guy. In Australia, we've
very
had
intelligent as well.
Yeah, we've had our eye on Jack Catterall for a long time. He was linked with Liam Parrow years ago back at 140. There was a whole dance that sort of never happened, maybe down the track at will. So, certainly a guy that doesn't get his plaudits. And to your point, become a bit of an action fighter in recent appearances. So I'm certainly excited for that one too. But Hamza Shiraz, mate. Oh, sorry, Declan, did you want to say something about Jack?
No, well, I can do. The thought that came to mind, I wasn't desperate to, but the two highest profile fights of Catterall's career are against Josh Taylor. Very, very good fighter, and they were very entertaining. And there was no controversy, despite what Bob Arum said in the rematch. And Catterall won a really entertaining fight. So if your two highest profile fights have been entertaining and made the impression they have, then it just seems harsh to treat him. But boxing fans can be a tough crowd.
Yeah, we certainly can. But, mate, Hamza Shiraz gets to pick up, or attempt to pick up, I should say. I shouldn't foreshadow anything with my own opinions, but the vacant WBO super middleweight world title. Is there getting a bit of buzz back home for Hamza, mate? He had coming off that great victory over Edgar Berlanga up at 168 and now straight into a title fight. You like his chances here?
I like his chances a lot, yes, but I haven't picked up on any kind of buzz around this fight happening. Yeah, I don't detect a greiter awareness of this fight. And frankly, a few weeks ago, I'd forgotten it was happening. And I guess that's partly because of how I feel about the main event. But yeah, this is a good opportunity for him to A, win the title, which we thought has been in his future for some time. B, I guess, demonstrate how we at least assume he's continuing to improve under Andy Lee. I really like the combination of those two. In some respects, well, in a lot of respects, it's a shame weight caught up with Shiraz and he had to move up because he could have, I think he could be the best middleweight in the world right now if he was still down there. But and the dimensions of super middleweight make that it's harder to talk about and doing that there with the same confidence. But there's a lot of potential to Shiraz. The reason he has heavy hands, and the reason I like the matchup with Andy Lee to the extent I do is you mentioned the name Tommy Hearns earlier. Well, Frank Warren has compared Hamza Shiraz to Tommy Hearns, and of course he has because he's a promoter, and that's what promoters do. But one comparison people can't challenge is physically, the dimensions.
Yeah.
Shiraz has really long arms, and Shiraz can bang, but don't know to the extent to which he can bang at super middleweight yet. But Tommy Hearns is the greatest product of the Kronk Gym. Andy Lee is a product of the Kronk Gym, knows the Kronk philosophy. Kronk philosophy knows how to turn long-range fighters into destructive punchers. It could be... Andy Lee looks a very good trainer anyway, psychologically, in his ability to get into fighters' heads. I wonder if Tyson Fury would have been better served committing to him some time ago. But they look like they could work really well together. I think the same with Ben Whittaker under Andy Lee as well, actually. I like Shiraz's chances, and I like where victory could lead to him.
Yeah. So at least we'll be tuning in for the undercard on this show.
Yes, I say that with some hesitation because I'm tempted to rebel against the entire thing. But I will be watching those fights at some point.
Well, this one's a pay-per-view as well, so I might have to listen to it on the radio, but we'll see how we go. But, mate, over in Japan, we've got an absolute banger of a card, and this is probably flying under the radar a little bit globally, but again, I'm putting my biased Australian cards on the table. So I'll start with that one. Andrew Maloney, one of the good guys. Andrew and Jason are my favourite Australian fighters. I think they're amazing role models. They never put a foot wrong in or outside the ring. They're perfect ambassadors for young people, and parents can feel comfortable with these guys being the example set for their children, all that type of thing. I could gush about them forever. But Andrew Maloney at 35 years old, maybe even 36, I'd have to look it up, seemingly with his last world title opportunity that he very admirably stuck to, was offered... Oh, you probably know more about that situation than me, but was offered step-aside money for Bam Rodriguez to take that fight and said no. I believe the purse split in terms of world title fights is certainly not a very favourable one from a small pool, so it doesn't seem to be life-changing money, but, Andrew Maloney's in it for principle over profit, and he's going for it seemingly one last time against the defending champion, Willibaldo Garcia. Also on the card, Masamichi Ibuki defends his IBF flyweight title against Rennie Calixto, and Masamichi Ibuki has just been an absolute goddamn warrior. He's must-see TV, and a fight years in the making finally happened. I don't really know what to expect of this, certainly at least on one side of it, but Luis Nery and John Real Casimiro, some other good fights on the undercard, but we'll stick with those three, and even if Andrew's not the main event, this is an Australian podcast, so he's our main event. How do you sort of see this fight for Andrew, and do you think I've kind of summarised his plight at this age and this point of his career? Like, do you think this might be the last shot for him if he were to be unsuccessful?
Unfortunately, I do, yeah. So I want to echo your thoughts about the Maloneys anyway. They are a great example, great professionals, just very likeable as well. And they have sought to make the most of their careers, make the most of the opportunities presented to them. The cliche with them is that they're kind of road warriors, aren't they? But it's kind of, reality is they've spent a long time on the road, and kind of, unfortunately for them, their careers have come at slightly the wrong time to really capitalise on this relative boom in Australian boxing, because they had to go out and be independent. Like you, I share your admiration for him and his determination to take advantage of this opportunity. But I do question the wisdom in doing so again. And I get that why he's doing it, which is partly why I admire it so much, because he wants to be a world champion. But I think, and it's very easy for me to say, but I think the most important thing for any fighter is to earn as much money as possible while they can fight. And I don't think step-aside money for a title fight is to be sniffed at. You're getting money to not fight, which is a joy. And you get the near guarantee that your title fight is still going to come after that, and so you get that title fight. I fear that's a misstep on their behalf. I admire it potentially came from. There's a possibility that it came from thinking, well, Rodriguez will win that title, and we haven't got a chance of winning against Rodriguez. And I don't like to say it, but I don't hesitate to say it. Maloney would not beat Rodriguez. Rodriguez is an incredible, incredible fighter.
Certainly be an underdog, even I would have to agree with that.
So I want to say they give themselves a chance of beating Garcia, but I also make him the underdog against Garcia, not least because he's travelling, but Garcia is more, of the two of them, is the one at his physical peak, and has more momentum ultimately. So, it's a tough ask. The only thing I have also thought about him is that if this doesn't work, there's also the possibility his brother is being rebuilt as an attraction of sorts, not that he required it, but in Australia now. Two might prove more powerful than one, and they might work as a kind of a joint attraction for Tasman in this potentially post-Opataya era.
Yeah, well, and to that point, I don't even know what Andrew's contractual situation is. I'm not sure if he's still affiliated with Top Rank or if he's with Tasman or if they're independent. I actually don't know. That's a great point you bring up. Something to keep an eye on moving forward. But that's a fantastic fight card. I'm sure because of Andrew, there'll be some sort of Australian broadcast. Whether it would be on TV or not, I'm not sure. It may be via the internet, but we'll see how we go. That's a bit of a must, can't miss card, excuse me. But the very next day over in the UK, Declan, Chris Billum-Smith is back against Ryan Rozicki, and more interestingly, it's the new Turkey Al Sheikh backed, Dana White led boxing promotion that has seemingly certainly got me very conflicted in the way I feel about it, and probably most people in the wider boxing world as well. But it's the Zuffa Boxing's UK debut. What we'll get to your thoughts just after, but has there been any what's the word on the street? Is there excitement for this? Is there anticipation? Is there a bit of doubt? Like, what are people thinking about Zuffa Boxing's debut show? It's only just around the corner.
Actually, to my knowledge, none of those things. I don't detect any great interest or lack of interest either way. I think it's a case of, let's see how this goes. There is a lot of positivity about Sky Sports returning to boxing, first with MVP and now with Zuffa, but not because it's with MVP or Zuffa, just because of the wider awareness of how good Sky Sports typically has been for boxing. And the reality is, if Sky Sports aren't in boxing, then British boxing is considerably weaker. This is interesting overall because a combination of MVP and Zuffa, this is the first time Sky Sports isn't being headed up by a British fight figure, which changes the picture.
I didn't even put two and two together on that. Yeah, that's interesting.
But I guess I think it's going to be one of those that it's going to be judged as it unfolds. To my mind, Billum-Smith is potentially a pawn in the wider game of Opataya for Zuffa and their ambition in the US. But I'm happy for Billum-Smith that he's getting this opportunity. A, he deserves it. Someone who makes the most of his career. But B, when we're talking about, I guess, the politics and TV and everything, Sky Sports had that high-profile split from Boxer at a time when Chris Billum-Smith was a Boxer fighter and had been good for both Boxer and Sky Sports. And to my mind, Billum-Smith was perfect for the BBC, marketable, to use a cliche of sorts, he's the kind of boxer that mums and grandmothers was like. And purse bids were ordered for a fight against Romain Fress when he was still with Boxer, and there was such a lack of interest in that first round of purse bids that they were called a second time around, and for a second it looked like Boxer potentially paid a blinder because they knew by that stage that they could get the Smith-Fress fight, a title eliminator, on the BBC for very little money. It's no secret the BBC pay a lot less for these fights than Sky Sports, and that the onus is on the promoter to earn money from elsewhere. So they don't have the budget they did previously. But Billum-Smith looked perfect for that. And if he wins that on the BBC, then he's potentially fighting for a world title on the BBC. And Boxer's start with the BBC, though has a lot of potential, hadn't been as successful as was widely hoped. And yet they didn't want to go in for what would have been potentially very relatively cheap purse bid. He has now since been allowed to sign with Zuffa, and Billum-Smith's career is going in a different direction, which I think if he wins this, it wouldn't surprise me whatsoever if he ends up fighting Opataya next.
Well, there's been whispers of Jai Opataya signed to fight Noel Mikhailian, which would sort of fly in the face of what happened with the IBF situation in his first fight with Zuffa. Like the public messaging on that whole situation is out of control. Like, it's so far so good. So far, Zuffa are fitting into boxing perfectly because you cannot believe a word they say. They'll just say anything, and then anything will seemingly happen. It's out of control. So we'll see what happens there. But fingers crossed.
That's exactly why I've got no faith in the Mikhailian fight happening. You'd like to think it would, and it's certainly better in the context of Opetaya's ambitions, but how can any of us have any confidence in that happening? What I would say, by the way, if Opetaya Bilham Smith does happen and it happens in Vegas, that would be a real shame. That's a fight that should happen in the UK or Australia without question.
Yeah, and mate, I've maintained this for sure, and you would know this. I think Jai should be based in the UK. He's way more well known in the UK than he is in Australia, which is a travesty. But that's just the failings of the boxing media landscape. But I would say Jai's way more. Not saying he's a star in the UK, but he's certainly well more known in the UK than Australia. Would you agree with that?
Interesting point. Not something I'd thought about, but we have a big Australian population here, so I see the potential in it. I think one of the biggest things working against Opetaya, other than his nationality, which suddenly feels like a risky thing to say on an Australian boxing podcast, just because of, I guess, the limitations we've described of, certainly historically, of the Australian fight scene, is he's in the cruiserweight division. This is actually a pretty good time to be a cruiserweight. It's a competitive division with a lot of appealing fights, but typically the cruiserweight division is overlooked, and it's overlooked because it has, relatively speaking, minimal history. It's not that competitive. Every time we have a great cruiserweight, Holyfield, Usyk, to a lesser degree David Haye, they've gone up and been much more of a attraction at heavyweight, and that's partly why I think that's where Opetaya's future lies as well. There just isn't the money in fighting as a cruiserweight as there is in heavyweight boxing, and even if Opetaya's fighting here and he is more popular here, you look around at his potential rivals, and I don't think the potential rivals, Bilham Smith aside, would be that appealing to an audience in the UK, even if it is a big Australian audience as part of that.
Yeah, well, that's interesting, but it's baffling that Jai isn't unbelievably popular. He's everything you want in a boxer. Unbelievably skilled, goes for the knockout, fearless, tough, funny, honest in interviews. Like, I'm not saying he's the greatest speaker ever, but
absolutely.
If you ask him a question, he's going to tell you exactly what he thinks. Like, he should be huge.
He's one of my favourite interviews for that reason. He's never been concerned about anything that he's been asked, in my experience. Ultimately, backs himself, and I think he deserves better than, again, I fear his career is on course to deliver for him.
Yeah. And his constant swearing is actually like endearing. Because you can imagine, like, that's literally just how he talks.
What he is, in my experience, is authentic. And increasingly, particularly like you said about those are your words, Zuffa being well suited to boxing because you can't believe anything they say. I bored to death of people lying to me, and very obviously lying to me. And I know it's an occupational hazard; it goes with the territory. But Opetaya, by comparison, is a joy.
Yeah. Absolutely. And just one more for you, Declan, just to finish up. I didn't put it on the rundown the other day because I only found out about it this morning when I woke up. And certainly, interestingly, along the same lines, but Ryan Garcia was on an American talk show and announced that his next fight is going to be against the UK's Conor Benn, presumably for the WBC welterweight title. I don't know how, again, Jai got stripped when he was with Zuffa and with the IBF title, and I don't know what's happening. We're just going to have to wait and see. It's crazy. But has this resonated all day in the media cycle in the UK, mate? Or is everyone just sort of over Conor Benn? Like, what's the...
No, they're not over Conor Benn. Conor Benn is... I'd like to think he won't have a problem with me discussing this view. A conversation recently with the editor of Boxing News over some separate work, and Conor Benn came up as a subject. And he was speculating about putting Conor Benn on the front cover because of his perceived popularity, and then questioned his popularity. And I said, actually, the boxing hardcore are very cynical about Conor Benn for all the obvious reasons. But I don't get the impression that the wider public, and Conor Benn has crossed over into the wider public. It was a wider audience as opposed to a boxing audience that watches two fights with Eubank Jr. I don't think they're as aware of that, and I don't think they care as much either way. I think what they care about is that they find him entertaining. They obviously do. He is marketable, which helps with when you're talking about a crossover audience. I don't think I think there's a bit of fatigue around him, or there's a risk of fatigue around him from the hardcore boxing fans who certainly question his abilities at that level, but I don't think there is from a wider audience. And a lot of those things you could say about Ryan Garcia as well, by the way.
Yeah.
The one thing that it doesn't apply so much is I think Garcia's natural talent is above and beyond Ben's, but Garcia rarely threatens to fulfill his natural talent. He briefly did so against Luke Campbell. I'm not saying that because I'm British and I'm a fan of Campbell, even though I think Campbell was a really good fighter. I thought Garcia looked really good that night. The only other time I really remember thinking Garcia really looked the part, and it was a flawed performance, but it's got a lot worse with age, is the quote-unquote win over Devin Haney, when, of course, we learned he failed a drugs test. But Garcia has flattered. Yeah, Garcia has flattered to deceive at the highest level, but the raw abilities certainly were there at a younger age to make him a very good fighter. But again, Garcia knows how to generate a big following, and not unlike Conor Benn, will continue to secure big opportunities off of his profile. Boxing's a meritocracy above all else.
It certainly is. But we'll finish it up there, Declan. And thanks so much for giving me your time,
Thank
mate.
you.
I had an absolute ball chatting with you, mate. And best of luck with the rest of the year, mate, and sort of pivoting after boxing scene. I'm sorry to bring that up, but I'm sure there's many people listening, in Australia and maybe some other places in the world too that would be keen to hear what your next steps are. And we're all glad that there's certainly still a desire to work in boxing because, like I said, mate, you're a great contributor to the sport, and the sport would be lesser for not having you in it. So, thank you again for your time, mate. We'll finish this up and just stay on after we record because it just takes a minute or two to fully upload, mate. But if you'd like to down the track, mate, I'd love to get you back on before the year's done and do it all again.
I'll be very happy to. Been a pleasure, by the way. Thank you.
Awesome. Good on you, Declan.
Cheers, Zach.
All right, guys, and that was my chat with boxing writer and contributor Declan Warrington, all the way over from the other side of the world in England. And before I get on to anything else, I have to mention that Declan's internet was the absolute best internet we've ever had on the pod. Crystal clear, fast as hell. Oh, man, Australian internet's so bad. So, yeah, shout out to the internet service provider at the Warrington household. But how much fun was that, guys? Thanks so much to Declan. I just kept throwing topics at him because I was having too much fun, and he was happy to stick around and go a little bit longer than we've gone in recent times. So I really appreciate it, and great to hear that after Declan having a bit of a rough trot, obviously not to undersell that, but it's hard to put it into the correct terminology, but with his last boxing scene situation, it's really refreshing and encouraging to hear that Declan is still seeking a future within the boxing industry, because the sport needs people like him, passionate, educated people who can provide a massive amount of information to the fans, and not only established fans like we are, but also to new fans, and help the sport grow and help the fighters gain more notoriety and more popularity and potentially more sponsors and all that type of thing. The boxing writers and the people that are on the beat and covering these fights at ringside all over the world are an integral part of the system and how this thing works and how this ends up being profitable for fighters and trainers and cut men and all that type of thing. And Declan provides a great service. So, and also rapt to hear that his future seemingly is going to be in Australia coming up towards the end of the year, and he will be not only a great addition to Australia in general, but especially to the Australian boxing scene. So we'll keep our eyes peeled and see where Declan lands. And again, I thank him very much for the time. Now, guys, at the very top of the show, first time ever, you would have heard before the intro music hits, our friend, mate of the show, the TuskPod Clubhouse appearance leader, one of the most hardest working men in the sport, the ABS, the Aussie boxing scribe himself, Anthony Cox, has finally released his book. And I don't say finally facetiously, I mean finally as in I've been waiting for it for years at this point. As I said at the very start, his book is now available, The Brawl at the Sydney Opera House and Other Aussie Boxing Yarns. I've got my copy. The link to, if you would like to purchase a copy, is in the description of this episode. So click away and jump on. Just as I said, I'll reiterate everything I said at the start. You could not be supporting a better guy, and it's going to be, I know for a fact it's an absolutely fantastic, informative read. It's a hilarious read. I'm no writer, but it's written brilliantly. I think the front cover looks awesome. Like, Tony got to show us his artistic instincts. How cool is that front cover? The back cover, it just looks like an awesome book sitting on a shelf, and I can guarantee it's even better once you open it up and start reading all the beautifully crafted words inside. So guys, we will keep continuing to support Anthony Cox and his 7-year project for the foreseeable future on this pod. So yeah, if you want to get on board with that, you can do so by clicking that link. And also, I should mention, I've included, I don't think Declan's massive on the internet. I found his, obviously follow him on Twitter, excuse me, and I've included that social media handle for Declan on Twitter /X, whatever it may be referred to these days in your neck of the woods. But yeah, guys, I couldn't find anything else. I normally with writers from websites, I like to put their author page on the outlet that they write for, but obviously just due to bad unfortunate timing at the moment, we can't do that with Declan for his boxing scene page, but certainly hopefully next time, once Declan has established himself somewhere else, we will be able to do that down the track, and I'd love to talk to Declan again. So I hope you guys enjoyed that, and I just want to give a massive shout out to Scott Fife, a bloke who actually sent me an email a couple of months ago now and actually suggested that I reach out to Declan for various reasons. He actually alerted to me to the fact that Declan was temporarily based in Australia late last year and early this year, and thought it would be a really good fit. So Scott Fife, I believe he might be based in Scotland. I'm not sure if it is an Aussie based overseas, Scott, or if you're actually from overseas. I'm not sure, mate. But yeah, thanks very much for hitting me up. Thank you very much for the suggestion. I really appreciate it. Thoroughly enjoyed the chat, mate. And yeah, thank you for all your nice words in the email too that we've sent back and forth a few times. So yeah, shout out to Scott. Really appreciate it, mate. So guys, the next pod, I'm actually just freestyling the plan right now. So let's grab the calendar and have a look. So I've got an idea for the week after Andrew Maloney's world title fight in Japan on the 6th of June. And then we've also got the Liam Paro-Lewis Crocker fight on the 24th, I believe. So I've got an idea for in between that. So we can do, recap, preview, and then probably a recap after Paro as well. So I've got an idea for there. So in between, I haven't actually reached out to anyone or got anything planned for the next 2 weeks. So there is a possibility I may do a solo one, but I've also got a couple of slight little embers of an idea, or ideas, plural, I should say. So I might try and get something going there, but I think I've still got to check the BoxRec schedule for that time, but I think it's a little bit of a downtime the next week or two. I think we've got a Shaqy Foster, Ray Ford, which is going to be a good fight. We've got some stuff coming up, but it's not exactly fully loaded until Andrew Maloney's fight on the 6th. So that's about 2 weeks away. So we'll see how we go. Maybe a solo one at bare minimum between, possibly another guested episode, but I've got some ideas coming for June, guys. So that will be the schedule moving forward. But guys, if you want to get in contact with me, you can send me an email at tuscpod@gmail.com. That's tuskpod@gmail.com. If you want to throw a tweet at me, you can do that at delivery_man2. Also got the YouTube channel, guys. Thank you very much for the support. We're up to like 50 subscribers, man. How crazy is that? So thank you to everyone that subscribed. And I'm sure previous mate of the show, and hopefully future mate of the show, Lyndon Hosking, will be happy, because last time I had him on and he looked up the channel, I think I had like 14 subscribers, and he was like, this is off recording. I'm sure he won't mind me saying, he was like, bloody hell, man, get your subscriber count up, hey? What the hell is this? So, mate, we've bloody tripled it since Lyndon Hosking came on last time. But yeah, thanks to everyone who's gone above and beyond and subscribed there. But yeah, guys, also got the Instagram page. But as I always say, not a must follow, only post when there's a new episode. So, guys, that was a ton of fun. Thank you very much for listening. I'm not 100% sure. Oh, what do we got? We got Usyk this weekend. Enjoy the fights. Good luck to May Solomon. And guys, I'll chat to you later.
Road less travel may add up the change. there's no tomorrow, then tomorrow came.
Going all out.
I was living like there's no tomorrow, then tomorrow came. I got the wake-up call, laughing through the window frame.